Starting.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Combat Fan Podcast, presented by Legends of the Cage MMA. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, along with my co-host, Ed Carbajal, and on a weekly basis, we plan to bring you the biggest news in the world of combat sports. Ed, how you doing, brother?
What's up, man? Chilling, literally, here in New Jersey. Um, Lots of stuff to talk about. Obviously, just so folks know, we're doing like a test run here of obviously what we have planned coming in the future. I wanted to actually touch base. I wrote on the preview of this thing a little quick history of me, and for people that don't know that are watching, Matt is the guy that does the View from the Hawk's Nest posts over on the blogboardjungle.com. And he and I met through the MMA Community forum, and we accidentally ran into each other a while back in Vegas. So this is the first time he and I are doing a streaming thing, but we've actually had a few beers and met and talked combat sports before. So lots of stuff to talk about. We always chat in private, but obviously this week Nick Newell's been in the news a lot because he came back last Friday at LFA 35. Those results are up over at the blogboardjungle.com, and there's a lot of talk of him coming into the UFC. You and I both watched his career, man. What do you think, man? Is he ready? Justin Gaethje thinks he's ready.
You know, it's kind of one of those things where I kind of got mixed feelings on it. Is he ready? Yes. Is the world ready for it? That I'm not so sure about. I realize the MMA and UFC has gotten to the point where it's pretty much mainstream. But, I don't know if he can beat anybody in the top 10, and there's a part of me that worries about the final result if he were to lose a big televised fight in a brutal, ugly fashion.
I mean, he did lose. I think the worst he's ever lost was when he lost to Gaethje. But then he won the next two after that. I'm wondering why he fought at a catch weight at the LFA event, because he usually fights at lightweight. But I don't know. I mean, I think he definitely should get a run in there. You know, the time when you look at the grand scope of things in MMA as far as an athlete's career goes, as long as the longer they fight, it gets a little bit sadder when combat sports is a young man's game, and he's still a young man. So I think he definitely deserves his run.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely deserves it. I don't think that's in question. There's a lot of fighters that I'm looking on the outside that deserve a shot, and I have no question that I believe he could be top 20 fighter in the UFC, which means that he definitely deserves his opportunity. I guess my fear is the press that it would get if we had the situation like he had with Justin Gaethje and World Series of Fighting, where ESPN, mainstream CBS, any of those big companies pick it up, and you were to see him get mauled hypothetically on a big stage. It happens to every fighter, whether you have one arms, two arms. That's irrelevant. I mean, this is a violent sport. I just wonder how the world will pick that up in the world of social media. I wonder what that picture in a UFC cage would look like, and how that would be picked up, to the person who doesn't even watch the fights, but just clicks on CNN and sees the Bleacher Report photo of a bloody one-armed guy getting beat. Skill-wise, I don't even think it's close. I think he obviously deserves a shot. I mean, what the guy's done with his handicap or not is a resume that should get him into the UFC. I don't think that's even in question.
No, I agree with you. And that's one of the things that I always feel like the things that I mean, you have to use what you have to use. I mean, in this day and age of where attention, especially in MMA, where attention can get you, excuse me, the more eyes you have on you, the more sponsorship opportunities you have and whatnot. And I know that's a whole separate issue in the UFC with the whole Reebok thing, but just in general, like obviously the more high profile you are, and everyone always seems to bring up his disability. but obviously it hasn't hindered him at all as a fighter. It's always just weird. I mean, never mind. I mean, just not with him. Like, there's always something that people call attention to. I remember when I interviewed Austin Vanderford for the VFC event that he fought in at the end of last year, and I didn't want to bring it up, but the fact that now Paige Van Zant's fiance came up, and I didn't bring it up. He brought it up, but I mean, he was like, "Yeah, she's a super hot." His words, not mine. He was like, "Oh yeah, he got a super hot girlfriend. Why wouldn't I want to talk about her?" And in that sense, I get it, but it's just like, if you saw his fight, the kid's an awesome fighter too. So the same thing with Nick Newell. Like, his skills obviously have been speaking for themselves for 14 fights, and he stopped fighting October of 2015, if I remember correctly, because I wrote the article this morning, so the memory's fresh in my head. But he's only 31, so he's still in his prime. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing him in the UFC, but then again, it's a different. He wants to be in the UFC, so if that's what he wants, I think he deserves to get it. But obviously, there's other places to fight now these days that I don't know. Depending on the type of fan you are, it could be more lucrative.
Yeah, again, he deserves to be in the UFC. He deserves the money, the opportunity to make that money that would come along with the exposure that he could potentially get. He's done everything that he can do to earn that opportunity. And I'm fine with it. I'm just looking from playing devil's advocate from a a person who doesn't see fights like we see them or watch them like we watch them. And I can see where that could potentially be an issue. It likely would pass, and it would be news for 3-4 days if he were to really get beat. Now, on the flip side of that is he could go in and, heck, on any given night, the guy could go into the cage and beat almost anybody in the UFC's lightweight division. Welterweight might be a different case because I don't know if he'd be able to use his wrestling ability as much in that weight class. Yeah. But the guy deserves it. It's just one of those situations where you don't know what news we would be looking at. We can't really sit here the next day and go, "Hey, that's bad press about the UFC." Yeah. If we were to see potentially a situation where there's a battered, bloody guy with one arm fighting in the UFC. I mean, that's just the world we're in right now. Social media, it would spread, and the UFC is probably big enough to be able to get through that, but they don't seem to be doing very well with their promotions and their public image right now. So I'm not so sure how they would play that off or what their spin would be.
What I mean, what from the feedback you get, because I mean, you definitely interact with a lot more fans than I do. I mean, I'm obviously only on Twitter, but you're I mean, don't you hold some kind of record or something for going to the most events live than like anybody in your area or something like that?
No, there's no record. I've been to a couple hundred MMA events. I think 45 UFC events and 20 something Bellator. So I mean, I get around. I've met a lot of fans, and how I met you guys in New York, first for the UFC, the McGregor Alvarez fight, and then came out again for the big Bellator New York event. But it's one of those things where he's known. Most fans that are really into the sport that I run into would love to watch him fight. Again, I'd love to watch him fight. I'd pay to watch him fight. It's just in the back of my head, I keep thinking, what it could potentially do. It's probably just me thinking that this is 15, 20 years ago before the UFC's, kind of become mainstream. Probably would be accepted. And like I said, the guy earned it. He deserves it. On the flip side of there being a bad image, I guess you could also say in this culture that we're in now, if he wins some fights, the guy could be on top of the world. I mean, he could be the poster boy for a lot of good things if he's successful.
Just to go back to, like, obviously, I mean, because you're like a man about town when you're at an event. From what I've noticed since I've met you, and you interact, like you said, with a lot of fans. How often do you find yourself either having to debate the sport or just like defend the sport to like somebody that just like say came across a comp ticket or something?
it's not so much debating it. There has been in the past when it was lesser known. When I would bring it up, or someone would ask me what I was doing for the weekend, and I explain that I'm going to a fight event or 2 fight events, or 3, whatever, however the weekend rolled. But
Yeah.
nowadays, most people have seen it and at least know what it is. The biggest ignorance from fans is talking about older fighters that they just plain haven't seen.
Yeah.
The McGregor fan base is a fun fan base to watch fights with.
Yeah, definitely.
But and it's a party. It's a great time, and they have a lot of good fans.
Yeah.
But I've also noticed a nice chunk of them are new to the game as far as being introduced when McGregor became a big name, and talking to them. Eddie Alvarez didn't put up a performance to represent what Eddie Alvarez is. I think the people that saw that fight and were kind of talking smack about him saw his fight with Justin Gaethje since, and if they're fans of the sport, they're realizing how big that win by McGregor was, and not necessarily that it was a representative of who Eddie Alvarez is.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because obviously, I mean, the region that I'm from is the same. I mean, Eddie Alvarez is from this region. He's a northeast. For fans around here, I mean, they were selling those underground champ shirts.
Underground King.
Underground King, yeah. Those were already that's something that's been around here for a while because Eddie Alvarez is he was I mean, he's been to the MMA World Expo at the Javits Center in New York. Actually, if you read, I mean, he calls himself that for a reason. If you read Jim Genia's book Raw Combat about the whole history of MMA's ban in New York and all that, and how a lot of those guys like him and Sarah and Frankie Edgar had to fight here in New Jersey because it was banned in New York. It's just there's a lot of history about it. So the fan base goes back further than people have been hearing his name a lot lately. But he's fought in Dream too. He's definitely somebody that like you said, it wasn't a good representation of what Eddie Alvarez is. It was better when he fought Justin Gaethje. Obviously, that's more what we're used to.
Yeah, and I go back to watching him from the Bodog days. I'm a huge fan of Eddie Alvarez, and I'll be ready to defend him against any fan who wants to try to talk bad about the guy. But yeah, for the general, mostly fans are nowadays know a little bit about the sport, and historically, 10 years ago, I'd have arguments with people about Fedor, and I'd get told that he'd be submitted by Czech Congo, and and it'd get heated in bar situations because Fedor's my guy, and but
I do remember seeing you. I forget who it was with. It was somebody that we were cool with, but you did have to kind of like you went into like because I tell people when I talk about you to other people, especially the guys like at Front Proof Media, or when I go to the meetups in New York and I mention you, I'm like, this guy's like, because you're one of the most your mind is like an encyclopedia of MMA, and I know a lot of times I'll even DM you in the middle of writing something because I know I'll get a correct answer. But it's just weird. I mean, like, it's just weird. I remember, I forget who it was, but it wasn't the last time you were in New York this past June for the Bellator event. I don't even remember what the debate was about, but you did such a good job of shutting the person down that they had no argument for you. I don't remember what it was about. That I wish I could remember. Just because you said that, it just sparked in my mind.
Yeah, I've had a bunch of those, and it's different now. As I've gotten older and realized that in the sport's big now, I don't necessarily need to defend it like I did in the past. I mean, I felt like an old school fan. I mean, I go back to 1995. I started attending events in the late 90s.
Wow.
When you talk about the Underground King on the East Coast, and for fans that are just listening and don't know us, I'm out of Southern California, and you're out of the New Jersey, New York area. So we're kind of cross country, bringing our opinions to this. But yeah, I mean, I go back to the underground days on the West Coast. I'm sorry.
I don't mean to cut you off, but because you just mentioned where you're from, and speaking of the West Coast, I mean, one of the other things you and I talked about and it's something we wanted to get into with the Bellator's heavyweight tournament. But and I've actually said this to when I speak to the folks over at Bellator, because as you guys know, I do cover the events when they come up in this region, in New York, and when they were here in New York, when they're in Mohegan Sun in Connecticut, and anywhere else that I can get to on site. And but it seems to me, and you know better than I do. I feel like you've been to more, obviously, for the same reason. They're definitely put on more events out by you than they do over here. Um, I mean, would you say that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I would say for Bellator they do.
Because they're based in San Jose, right?
They're based in San Jose, so there's obviously a couple events there a year. I usually get an event that swings through Los Angeles. And just recently we had Bellator 193 at the Pechanga Indian Reservation, which is in Temecula, a couple miles from my house.
That was the Darian Caldwell.
No, that was the Lorenz Larkin
Oh, that's right.
Gonzalez fight.
Yeah.
So they just redid their sports arena there, and I'm hoping to get a bunch more Bellator back. Before they started the renovation, I was getting about 2 or 3 Bellator events a year, just a couple blocks from my house.
So did you make it to the first round of the heavyweight tournament of the January event with where McDonald won and they did the Chael versus Rampage?
Yeah, that was Bellator 192. That was at the Forum in LA.
And you were there for that.
Yeah, I made it to that one. Pretty much don't miss a Bellator event. If it's within a 3 or 4 hour drive, I'm pretty much there. That goes for Bellator and UFC, Invicta, the big shows.
So I mean, we already got 2 fights out of the tournament out of the way. So you were at that one, and I covered Mitrione and Roy Nelson at Mohegan Sun, which so I was there, and it seemed like all the booze and the people that, I mean, I still see things about it from where you were sitting. You're watching it on TV. Did it seem like there was anything wrong with that fight? Because I thought it was a tough fight for Matt Mitrione to win, because there was booze in the arena when I was there that night, and as me just sitting there watching it cage side, I was just like, I don't understand where this is coming from. It was a good fight, and I agreed with the decision. Did you?
Yeah, I thought the decision was right. I didn't think that Nelson did enough in the third to get a 10-8 and earn a draw. Although as a fan, it would have been fun to see another round. I thought the fight was better than the Chael Rampage fight. I'll tell you that. That was quite a letdown. But I think of all the first round bouts, I think that was the one that kind of was expected to be a potential snoozer out of all of them.
Yeah.
The Mitrione Nelson fight, I think if anything, you got boozed because the fans expected more fireworks out of that fight.
Yeah.
You know, if you looked at the matchups, I would say of the four quarterfinals, that would have been the one that probably most people would have guessed was going to end in a knockout. If you know, I guess Fedor Mir could potentially fall into that category. But I think most people figured it would be a slugfest with Rampage or with Mitrione and Nelson, and there was a little bit of wrestling, and I was surprised by the fight. I thought Mitrione was the clear number 1 seed going into the tournament, and after that fight, I'm not so sure anymore. His ground game and his stamina didn't impress me all that much.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I mean, he survived, and there was a key lock attempt that he got out of, and he was in the crucifix position. So, and he managed to slip out of that. And so I mean, his defense was on point. I think he even admitted in the post-fight press conference, that's up actually on the YouTube channel too, as far as his own criticisms of his performance. But obviously he had the right game plan for him. The first two rounds pretty much were identical, and I mean, and Roy Nelson's just, even for heavyweights, I mean, both those guys are giants, but just to have that guy on top of you, I mean, you know, it's not something you're going to get out of easy. So I don't know. And that makes me think about what you said about, you know, with Chael and Rampage and their, when they fought, sometimes to win, it might not be the most exciting thing, but even when they were doing the media for it, I forgot what radio show both Chael and Rampage were on, but Chael Sonnen said, I mean, if he could his leg hump his way to a heavyweight title, he's going to do it. And if that strategy works, I mean, I know it's boring and it's not exciting, but I'm not going to fault him for it either.
No, I wouldn't fault him for it, but I think that's the only way he could potentially win it. We're not going to see Sonnen stand in the middle of the ring and swing with any of these guys and
Yeah.
and win by
Well,
knock.
you know what my concern is, and I definitely want to hear what you think about it too. He was so sore after that fight. He talked about it like the next two podcasts of his own podcast that he recorded. He was so sore, and I'm like, all right, well, Rampage was heavier than you, but the guys that are left for him to fight now are bigger. I mean, he's kind of small, like outside of King Mo, who's already used to fighting heavier guys because he's fought at heavyweight in Japan. Um, I feel like the next few fights are going to be harder for him. I don't know if that strategy will work, like, especially against guys like, I mean, look at who's left. You got Frank Mir and Fedor fighting next, right?
Yeah, I think it would be an upside down world if Chael Sonnen's able to beat Frank Mir or Fedor Emelianenko. If him beating those guys would, I can't even really think of much bigger upset, even at those guys' age. At everybody's age, I don't see how I guess he could wrestle down Fedor and lay on top of him if Fedor's that far gone, but I just can't see it. And along with the chance at a submission. Historically, I think Sonnen's tapped out to submissions like 14 times in his career.
Yeah.
I don't see him getting Mir down. I don't think he has a chance in hell of taking down Frank Mir. And I think that's probably the worst place. I don't think he has a chance against Frank Mir, and I think his only chance is if Fedor comes in completely out of shape and is able to be taken down and laid on. And I don't know if seeing that Rampage kind of came back in the third round against Sonnen, I don't think he'll be able to hold down Fedor for 3 full rounds without getting blasted. I mean, Rampage could have won that fight, but he's slow. His heart's not in it. At least from.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off, but my concern most is I mean, so the thing with Chael is I actually have confidence in his takedowns and his grappling because I know, you know, I've followed him when he was in it, when he wasn't fighting, but he was still, you know, he was still competing in grappling tournaments and Metamoris and things like that, and he's been promoted twice since he's been gone and come back. He's got his brown belt in jiu-jitsu now under Fabiano Scherner, and I mean, I've watched a lot of his grappling matches. I mean, he could definitely survive. And if you watch even the fight that he lost against Tito, he showed improvement because he changed submission attempts together. And the same thing with the fight with Wanderlei, positionally, how he kept on maintaining mount. And I mean, it's just, he just seems to have his fight IQ seems to have grown in his time off. So that's why I don't really like to count him out, especially anyone that's a wrestler. I feel like him and King Mo and Ryan Bader, anybody coming from wrestling, I think they can. I think they're the strongest ones to come out at least towards the end of this thing.
Yeah, I just can't see him. Like I said, it would be an upside down world if he were to submit Frank Mir. I mean,
yeah.
You know, I just can't see that happening. You know, like I said, Fedor's my guy, so I even hate to think about the idea of him losing to Sonnen. Potentially, I guess it could happen. I mean, I got to attended Metamoris when Sonnen fought Galvao, and he took him down a bunch, or he took him down and stayed on top. But I mean, 10 minutes into the match or so, he ended up getting submitted.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's just kind of the history of Sonnen. I mean, he's a great front runner, but when the going gets tough and he starts to get a little tired, he seems to open himself up to those submissions. And, you know, his fight with Rashad in the UFC I was at, his second fight with Silva. I mean, I saw him fight Jeremy Horn in the UFC. When the going gets tough, the guy tends to not step up too much. You know, and like I said, I'm not looking to badmouth Sonnen, but that's just what I see.
Yeah.
And against guys that are bigger than him, that he can't kind of bully around. I don't think it's a good matchup, either one of those guys, for him. But that's, you know, the fact that he beat Rampage is pretty good feather in his cap and nice little thing for his resume to add on. And the fact that he'll actually step into the cage with Fedor or Frank Mir is another thing, and he deserves the respect for that.
Yeah. I definitely think it's he's got a lot of tough fights ahead of him. That's for sure. I mean, especially who do you have? I mean, the next one is Mir and Emelianenko. I know you got Fedor's sweater and everything, but
I'm going to go with Fedor. I think he's
yeah.
going to be quick. I think he'll land a punch. Mir's a little punchy. They both are, but I don't take a lot out of the Fedor Mitrione fight. They both landed punches. It was a simultaneous knockdown. Mitrione's a big, strong guy. He hit him a little bit more on the chin. I don't know. I'll pick Fedor in that fight by TKO. And then in May we get the Bader and King Mo fight. I think Ryan Bader is just a better version of King Mo right now. I think if Mo would have never had all his knee injuries and he's got some mileage on him now, so I think they're pretty similar actually in fighting style. They both have knockout power. They're both excellent wrestlers. I think I see Bader grinding out a win in that one. And then that would set up, that would give us Fedor and Chael, and I think Fedor wins that, and then that would give us Mitrione and Bader, which is definitely an interesting fight. I think it comes down to size, and I honestly, if it's a heavyweight tournament, for me, go with the heavyweights, the true heavyweights, and I called it in the beginning, and I think we're going to get a Fedor Mitrione rematch. That's kind of what I see happening, and I look forward to seeing it. I feel a little bit cheated, and after seeing Mitrione's first performance, it's one of those things where Fedor, he used to fight so smart. It's his fight IQ seems to have declined over the last few years, but if he's able to take Mitrione into deep water at all, I don't know. I think it becomes a very, very interesting fight if that fight goes 7, 8, 9 minutes into it.
Yeah, no, me too, definitely. That's good. That honestly, that's the thing in the entire sport of MMA, and I don't care. I mean, I'm probably gonna get a lot of hell for this on anyone that watches this later, but that's probably the most exciting event all year for me. Scott Coker said it's something that he thinks the sport needs right now. The heavyweight tournament. And I agree with him 100% because it's definitely sometimes every event can't be the same thing. You have a bunch of fights and then a main event, and then you need something to change it up a little. That's why people jumped all over the Mayweather McGregor thing. It was just something different,
Yeah, well, it's I wrote a piece for the blog board and for the MMA community about the Bellator tournament, and for me being an old school fan, it was just the tournament aspect of fighting is what I think the sport should be. To me, it gives a clear winner. It kind of develops a storyline along the way. I mean, here we're talking about potential fights 6, 8 months from now. You can't really do that with any other. We know. This weekend, for example, we got Verdun and Volkov fighting in London for the UFC. But beyond that fight, we don't know what's coming up next. The tournament, we see it. I'm curious to see what they're going to do with the alternate situation. I know Javi Ayala and Chet Congo have been named as alternates. I don't know if they're supposed to be fighting each other. I don't know if potentially they just can get a bye at any point. That's been a little vague from Coker on that.
That's a good question. I didn't even think about that.
I mean, the odds of getting through all 4 quarterfinals and semifinals without an injury that knocks somebody out for 6 months is pretty rare. I mean, so far the first 2 fights have pretty much allowed that to happen because we haven't had a big knockout. We haven't had a situation. Well, the loser's going to get obviously suspended and they're not in the tournament any longer. But we haven't had a back and forth slugfest yet where the winning fighters come out in bad shape. So I'm curious to see how that unfolds. And but just like I said, being able to talk about future fights and how it can unfold, it kind of tells a story. I mean, that used to happen in one night. You used to have the one night tournament where it was a 3-hour event for UFC, but I remember specifically sitting back in the day and watching the tournaments, and you kind of felt like you got to know the fighter as the event evolved. You got to the next round and you had just seen him fight, and if it was a returning fighter, it didn't even have to be a big name. It could have been somebody like Paul Varlins. Okay, I saw him win a couple fights in UFC 6. He won his first fight, Cal Worsham. He went on to fight Tank Abbott, lost his fight, but didn't give up. It basically came down to John McCarthy stopping that fight, and then he comes along the next event at UFC 7, wins his first 2 fights, and then fights Marco Huas, and you just kind of got to the point where you're going, okay, this guy's a tough dude. You got to know him. Not the greatest skilled MMA fighter of all time. He's a giant, one of the biggest men I've ever met in my life. But you got to know these guys, and you got to follow their history, and there wasn't an event every other week, so you got to look forward kind of to the next show and the next tournament, almost as the story developed. And I feel like that's what tournaments give us. Ryzen it does that.
Yeah.
That's how Pride was. You could,
I loved Pride was fun. I loved,
I just love to be able to look at a bracket and anticipate what could happen, and it gives you a chance to research the guys and get to know about them. And
well, yeah, look now. I mean, it was today, right? March Madness. That's a bracket people get excited about. You're right. You're absolutely right about that.
There you go. It's perfect time to bring that up. It's the same kind of thing. People fill out their brackets, and they're not just concerned about the first round. They're picking, the next round, and then the semifinals, and the finals, and and it gets people excited because they're looking for potentially what could happen, how the matchups could be. Strategically, you're trying to figure out how so-and-so matches up with so-and-so if they advance another round. And, I mean, that to me, that's how MMA should be. The Professional Fighters League, I'm curious to see how their tournament unfolds. They got their $1 million tournaments, and, if set up right, I'm definitely curious to see how that goes. Could be really fun.
Me too, especially they're starting in June, so we still got a little bit to wait for that. But I'm looking forward to it as well. As far as what we got on deck in the immediate future, this weekend is the UFC's in the UK, right? With who's in that? Fabricio Werdum and Volkov. What is it? Alexander
Volkov. Yeah, he's former Bellator heavyweight champion. Yeah. Eventually lost to Vitaly Minkov. And gosh, I think I can't remember the exact event. It was like Bellator 120. Might have been Bellator 120. I think it might have been the Shlemenko Tito card as well. But yeah, I mean, good fighter, tall, lanky, and everybody knows Verdun. Card's a little bit low on big name value, but I think it'll be a fun main event for sure.
Yeah, and you know what? Tell me if you agree with this, because in my experience, the cards that people seem to let slip off, because they're like, oh, it's not that good or whatever, or those usually wind up being the highlights for the next 6 months come off of cards like that. And in my experience, do you agree or do you think I'm just trying to be a little too nice to the guys that are trying to make their way?
No, I mean, I think there's something to that. You have hungry fighters that are getting an opportunity to fight in the UFC.
Yeah.
I think people tend to confuse the word card with fights. No matter how the fights unfold this weekend, the card is weak. The card is what you look at, you see the list of fighters, and you go, I don't know most of these guys. That's the card. The fights can turn out to be great. And at the end of the day, you go, that fight card turned into great fights. But the card is still what it is. Maybe 10 years from now, we're going to look back and there's going to be 6 former champions on the card that fought this night. But yeah, I mean, they get the opportunity. The fights can be good. Often, like you said, they are good. Maybe possibly has to do with the expectations being a little lower. This isn't UFC 200 where, that was an event, for example, where the card was pretty damn stacked, but the fights didn't necessarily live up to the hype that night.
Yeah.
So that was a great card, but the fights were average. This weekend, I'm hoping that it's middle to lower card, but the fights turn out to be outstanding. And definitely could.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I bring it up is because we were talking about it earlier. One of the guys he's on the main card portion of the Fight Pass event. Terrion Ware had to defend. I forget. I don't even remember. It was some fan on Twitter, and I first of all, I thought it was cool that he responded to defend the event that he's fighting on, and he was just honest. He wasn't like upset or snippy about it. I think you said you saw it too. I don't remember what he said word for word, but he was just like, please tune in. Us guys that aren't a name yet are trying to make a name for ourselves, something to that effect. And I thought that was pretty cool that he said that. And it's definitely, if I wasn't going to tune in, which I was, I'm actually going to watch it on my phone at the Irish pub because it's also St. Patty's Day. But so while I'm drinking, I'll be watching the fights on my phone. Something I know that you're an expert at. While watching on a tablet or your phone or wherever. Through whatever the place's Wi-Fi is. But I mean, when I read that, I was like, man. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's because of I don't. A lot of folks don't. A lot of folks don't know because as somebody I've trained with guys that have fought in the UFC. I've trained with guys that compete in various levels of grappling and having tried to cut weight and stuff myself when I was younger and competing in grapplers class. It's just like I have an idea of the pressure and what they sacrifice and give up to go through. So that's why when I go watch an event or I do coverage or I always take it into account. That's why I wrote what I wrote about defending for the same the Connecticut card with Heather Hardy and Anna Hulaton. Like people were giving them so much negativity, and I was just like, hey, these chicks are doing it in MMA and boxing, and they don't care who pays them what or whatever. They signed both contracts without any hoopla in the media like we're seeing with Mayweather and McGregor. In a sense they're doing better than the men are. So I don't know. I just when I see stuff like that and what he said to that guy, I was just like, man, like how can you not like combat sports and how can you trash these guys they're pretty much going out there and getting hurt for your entertainment? You're going to sit there and boo them or bash them. I just never get that. I never get that mentality.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, there's no reason to bash the fighters. They're not the ones making the card. They're not the matchmakers, and they're taking the opportunity that's given to them. You bring up Terrion Ware. I actually saw him fight live last December for the Ultimate Fighter finale. He fought the up and comer Sean O'Malley.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I ended up going to a split decision, but he showed some toughness. The guy. He's another guy. He deserves to be in the UFC. UFC's got a big roster these days, and I saw the same tweet that you're mentioning, and it's nice. It's refreshing to see a fighter kind of know where they're at, talk about putting on a show. But I didn't get the impression that he wanted to try to sell the idea that he was, the world champion. It came off to me like, hey, I'm a fighter and I'm going to put on a show. If you're going to tune in, if you're going to buy a ticket, you're coming to watch a fight, and I'm going to put on a fight, and that's the attitude that most of the fighters have, and all of them should. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, you said something at the beginning of this when we started, so I'm only bringing it up because we're coming to the end now. But you said something about. I mean, how MMA is mainstream now, and it is mainstream, obviously, because they're on Fox Sports, whatever. It's more mainstream than it was in 2003, 2005, when we felt like we were in a little secret club, still watching it at late at night on Spike. But it's definitely like the funny thing about that statement is, I always find the sport still fighting an uphill battle when it comes to being as mainstream as boxing is. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if you find that, because obviously I feel like out where you're at, it's more accepted than it is around here. Like I still have to explain to people they don't punch each other in the balls anymore. Yes, there are rules. You know what I mean? So it just seems like amongst us, obviously it's very mainstream, but I mean, and then when we step outside of our social circle, it's not as mainstream as we would like it to be.
No, that's true, and I think boxing has a history. If you're talking to the person, the 50-year-old man sitting at the bar drinking a beer next to you and you bring up, combat sports, he knows boxing. Boxing's simple. Everybody's seen a boxing match,
Yeah.
And depending on your age, you either live through the Foreman Ali's, you live through the Sugar Ray Duran, then you go to Tyson. I mean, boxing had its celebrities. People knew the names. I think that you pretty much could ask that same guy at the bar if he knows who Conor McGregor is, and then you ask him if he knows who Anthony Joshua is, and Conor McGregor is going to get. They're going to know Conor McGregor a lot more than they're going to know that championship boxer these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there's so many events now. So you can't expect I can't expect the fans to keep up with it like the hardcore fans like me and you do.
Yeah.
And most of the fans that are going to listen to this podcast, those guys are watching as many fights as they can, and as much time they can. And when I say mainstream, when I see UFC news coming across the ticker on ESPN, when when you hear a radio show and they're talking about the UFC, when my local radio show up here is giving away tickets to the Bellator event, stuff like that. I maybe being so old school, I recorded Phil Donahue episodes just because they had Ken Shamrock on an episode.
Yeah.
I go back to Jim Rome interviewing Dana White when he first bought the UFC. When they announced the purchase of Pride, that was Jim Rome. Back then, I just remember if I would see anything, it would be a shock. I'd grab my VHS and pop it in and hit record. Just to Dan Severn showing up at a WWE event. I mean, that kind of stuff back then. It was new. You just, it's what I wanted. I was just thinking about that the other day. There's a guy on Twitter, Kaposa. He goes by @Grabaka Hitman.
Oh yeah.
And he puts out a combat schedule every week. If you're on Twitter, you definitely need to check him out. But he puts out a combat schedule, and on any given week, there's dozens of events.
Yeah.
Ways to watch them, and I think back to watching, gosh, 17, 18 years ago, watching a stream from Costa Rica on a 2x2 inch.
Yeah.
It didn't even full screen.
Yeah. And it was all choppy and yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And, in the tape trading days, I've got dozens and dozens of VHS tapes, in Russian and Portuguese, in Japanese that, it's just,
and now you can catch the streams right on the Blogboard Jungle through the Fight TV. We got the link on there for Fight TV. You can download the Fight TV app and watch them on your phone. It's like the free version of Fight Pass for folks that don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Fight TV is a great app. I have a subscription to Flow Combat, Flow Grappling. I mean, just between those, you get a ton of fights, and you can really keep up with the up and coming fighters, even at the amateur level and on up to some of the smaller pro events. But between that and Fight Pass, and Fight Pass, some people are negative towards the UFC. For $10 a month, I mean, there's a lot of other events other than UFC. I mean, this weekend's event is a UFC event that's on it.
But Victory's on there, and I love that promotion. I love that squared cage. Victory's on there. Titan, Invicta. The thing that made me, I was just about to say, the thing that made me sign up for it was Pancrase. Because I was always on the fence about it. When they picked up Pancrase, I was like, I gotta watch. Now I have to have it.
Yeah, well, that comes on late for you, but you can always watch the replay. But
exactly,
that's a 1 a.m. start time for you. But I mean, I go back to Pancrase. I ordered the first pay-per-views in '97. Boss Rutan, Frank Shamrock, Minoru Suzuki, Semi Schilt, so.
I got those DVDs in a box here somewhere.
But it just how much you struggled back in the day to watch those and how easy it is now. I mean, that's what makes it mainstream for me. The fact that it's accessible. I mean, the MMA isn't a league like the NFL. It's not, where there's 3 days out of the week where there's a game on. It's on big national TV, but if you want to access the sport, there's never been a better time, and you can get as much MMA nowadays as you can handle.
Yeah, you're right about that, man. Thank God for technology, because otherwise it would, not for nothing, if it wasn't for the technology like that we're using now to talk about it with whoever's listening, and the way that we met through the community forum, and the fact that we've been able to create something about this sport. I mean, it just, like you said, it's never been a better time to watch it and learn about it, and it's really easy to learn the history now too. So
yeah, exactly. And as this is wrapping up, I look forward to next week. We get a chance to talk about how this weekend's fights went, and getting some guests lined up for the show. I think this is going to be a good show for the fans to listen to, and
yeah, man. Once we get a regular following, so anyone that listens after the fact, we're doing it live now, but obviously it'll be on the website. Please leave your comments. Anybody at the MMA Community Forum, please let us know what you like, what you didn't like. I mean, me and the Hawk got thick skins. We can take it. And yeah, thanks again for making the time to do this. I mean, I really appreciate you reaching out. It's so hard to collaborate with folks and just do things. That's why writing became my thing. But is there anything else you want to say before we call it a night?
Yeah, I'd just say give me a follow on Twitter at MMA Hawk 21, and check out some of my posts at the MMAcommunity.com. Yeah.
Also, obviously, this will be on the blogboardjungle.com, and all this stuff is also in the YouTube description, like your Twitter handle, my Twitter handle, and folks that follow me, you can read my coverage over at Front Proof Media, Sure Dog, My MMA News, and the blogboardjungle.com. So I write at a lot of places. So all right, man. Thank you again, man. Again, as anyone following, make sure you give Matt MMA Hawk the follow because this is happening because of him. I mean, thank you so much for reaching out. Like I said, it's just so hard to find it's so hard to find like-minded folks that are willing to collaborate, and especially for MMA. So I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. And I look forward to working with you and Brian Moore of Legends of the Cage, and getting a bunch of good guests that'll keep the fans' interest, and talking some great MMA and combat talk with you.
Cool, man. All right. I'll holler later.
All right. Take it easy, brother.